Genesys is the newest Yu-Gi-Oh format in the TCG. It features no banlists along with no pendulums or link monsters, and a point system that's used to regulate how many powerful cards you can put into your deck. A deck can only have 100 points worth of cards in their list across the main, side, and extra deck. This puts a huge emphasis on non-pointed cards. So today we're going to be going over some of the best 0-point cards in the format to see what you should be considering for your build. And starting off at number 10, we have Therion King Regulus. This is an Earth machine with 2800 attack and 1600 defense. It has 2 hard once per turn effects. First, while it's in your hand, you can target a Therion monster or a machine monster in your grave. Special summon Regulus from your hand, then equip that target to this card. Also, when your opponent activates a card or effect, you can send a Therion monster card from your hand or field to the graveyard to negate that effect. It also has 2 static effects, where it gives a Therion monster it's equipped to 700 attack, and that monster can activate the negation effect of Regulus. Now, all of this equipping stuff has some use in Therion decks, but it's largely irrelevant for our purposes. Regulus is actually a very splashable card. Any deck that puts a machine monster into its grave over the course of its combo can play Regulus for a free Omni Negate for virtually no investment, which is very powerful, but in most formats, not all that noteworthy. However, negates are generally very expensive in Genesys format. Baronne de Fleur is a massive 85 points. Bastille Dispater is 10. Totally Awesome is 20 points and only works in specific decks. And the usual suspects of Borreload Savage Dragon and Appaloosa Bow of the Goddess are off the table thanks to the lack of link monsters. Generally speaking, it can be difficult to make an end board with negation if it's not an in-engine card. And even a lot of in-engine omnis like Dragon Maid Shio are also pointed. Even if you don't want negation for your end board, most cards that negate still cost points, such as most hand traps and the ever annoying Called by the Grave. This makes any 0-point card that can negate a lot more powerful through the lack of other options. And Regulus hits the sweet spot of being cheap and easy to use. The other easiest option to use is Void Ogre Dragon, but that negates spell or trap cards only, and requires you to have an empty hand to use. So they both have their own restrictions. The only real downside of this card is that you have to be playing a deck that has machines that you're putting into the grave, which not every deck can do. However, in any deck that can summon Regulus, it's something you're going to want to play just because it's one of the most efficient ways to get access to this effect in the format that doesn't require playing an entire, fairly specific deck to use. And at number 9, we have Magician's Souls. This is a level 1 dark spellcaster with 0 attack and defense. It has the effect where, while this card is in your hand, you can send a level 6 or higher spellcaster from your deck to the grave. Then you either special summon this card, or send this card to the graveyard to special summon a Dark Magician or Dark Magician Girl from your graveyard. While this card is on the field, you can send up to 2 spell and trap cards from your hand to the graveyard, and then draw that many cards. And these are both a hard once per turn. We've gone from generic machine support to pretty generic spellcaster support. Magician's Souls is a very common card to see in advanced anytime a deck has a high level spellcaster in it that it wants to play. Being able to Foolish Burial a card while also getting materials onto your field can be extremely valuable, especially since Soul's ability to trade in spell and trap cards is way more powerful than it may seem at first glance. This can be used to send cards that have already gotten most of their value to the graveyard, just so you can draw into more live cards, which comes up surprisingly often. Just as an example, in a deck like Gate Guardian, you can place the Gate Guardian pieces into your back row as continuous spell cards, using cards like Wall, Labyrinth, Shadow. You will want these in your back row to use as materials for the summon of your boss monsters, but things don't always go as you plan. Sometimes you'll need to dig for more gas, and using souls to draw an extra card or 2 can help you find what you need to make your play. It also helps that Kazejin is a spellcaster, so you have a monster to send for souls cost in your deck already. Magician's Souls even has a searcher you can play if it works especially well in your deck, Illusion of Chaos, which can add a Dark Magician or a non-ritual monster that mentions it, then place a card from your hand back on top of your deck, all while it's in your hand. One of the only real downsides of Souls is that it's quite bad into cards such as Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring or Drone Lockbird. But as those cards cost points in this format, you'll run into them less often and be more able to play around them. Similar to the last card on this list, the main thing holding Souls back is just that it only belongs in certain decks, so it's hard to call it generally one of the strongest cards that doesn't cost points in the entire format. And at number 8, we have Cosmic Cyclone. This is a quick play spell with the effect where you can pay 1,000 life points to target and banish a spell or trap card on the field. Now, this is a pretty underwhelming card in the grand scheme of things, and it's really only on here thanks to being the best non-appointed form of interaction for spell and trap cards. Heavy Storm costs 20 points. Harpy's Feather Duster costs 30, and Lightning Storm's cost is a massive 40 points. All of these are such intensive point costs that mass spell and trap card removal is mostly off the table, leaving us with the classics such as Mystical Space Typhoon and its upgraded forms. As a result, you're gonna see a lot of side decks full of cards like Cyclone and Twin Twisters to make sure you don't get caught out by the one jokester who thinks it's really cool to spend all 100 of their points on a single copy of Mystic Mine. The more interesting part about this whole discussion is the ways that the various decks have tried to find ways to play spell and trap card removal without playing spell and trap card removal. While jamming 3 Cyclones into your side deck is fine, they're cards that you'll only side in every once in a while, and they're honestly quite easy to cut depending on the way the meta goes from here. So many duelists are trying to find ways to handle these cards without having to dedicate full sideboard slots to these cards. One card that immediately becomes suspect for play is Final Bringer of the End Times. This is a quick play spell card that just targets one monster you control and one card your opponent controls and destroys both of them. This isn't a card that every deck can play, as you do need fodder that you can destroy without consequence to defeat it, but it can destroy either back row or monster cards, making it far more versatile and therefore able to be played in the main deck, unlike most dedicated spell and trap card removal. They're not particularly flashy cards, but unless spell and trap card decks really don't go anywhere, you're likely to see both Cyclone and Final Bringer in a lot of decks. And at number 7, we have Gameciel, the Sea Turtle Kaiju. This is a level 8 water aqua with 2200 attack and 3000 defense. It has an effect involving kaiju counters, but really that's not what's important here. What matters is its effect to special summon itself from your hand to your opponent's side of the field by tributing one monster they control. Also, if your opponent controls a kaiju monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. It also has the restriction where you can only control one kaiju monster. All of these effects are shared by all of the kaiju monsters, which has made all of them fantastic answers to your opponent's strongest monsters. There are a ton of powerful monsters with effects that make them hard to get rid of, from effect negation to being immune to other card effects. Because of the way kaijus work, they're not an effect that can be negated, and they don't target, meaning that almost all forms of protection will fail to stop you from kaijuing over an important monster from your opponent. The only real way is a card like Mask of Restrict, which surprisingly doesn't come up very often. The kaijus aren't the only cards in this category, however. Lava Golem can effectively eat 2 of your opponent's monsters while also stopping you from normal summoning, and the Winged Dragon Raw Spearboat eats up 3 of your opponent's monsters with the same restriction. All of these cards are completely free at Genesys, giving any deck an easy sideboard option for dealing with pesky, hard to remove monsters. The only thing holding this category of cards back is that most of the prime targets for these cards are less common in Genesys format. These are some of the only ways to out Towers monsters such as Expurely Noir that are unaffected by any and all other card effects, as tributing the monster is technically a summoning condition and not an effect. However, outside of Noir, there aren't too many cards of these effects running around, and with Omni-Negate monsters such as Baronne de Fleur at a staggering 80 points, the demand for kaijus is currently a bit lessened. With all that said, it's not as if these cards serve no purpose. Purely could become popular in the format, or any number of other target or destruction immune monsters could take over, at which point kaijus will become a lot more attractive. They won't always be in player side decks, but when the meta calls for them, we'll be happy that the kaijus and their ilk are completely free to play. And at number 6, we have 7th Tachyon and Small World, 2 cards that are very similar in what they do for decks. 7th Tachyon is a normal spell with the effect where you reveal an Xyz monster from your extra deck with a number between 101 and 107. Then add a monster from your deck to your hand with the same type or attribute as that monster and a level equal to that monster's rank. Then put a card from your hand on the bottom of your deck. However, you're locked into only summoning Xyz monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn. Small World is a normal spell with the effect where you reveal a monster card in your hand, then reveal a monster in your deck that shares exactly one of the following and none of the other, of that monster's attack, defense, type, attribute, or level. You then banish that monster in your hand face down, then find a third monster in your deck that shares one of those attributes with the second monster. You banish the first monster and the second monster face down, then add the third monster to your hand. Now, both of these cards do come with some pretty heavy deck building restrictions. You have to be pretty focused on Xyz monsters to play 7th Tachyon, and playing Small World requires building several Small World chains in your deck. However, both of these are pretty manageable. They also do require you to go -1, which does hurt, but it's not bad in the right deck. There are a ton of monsters that can spiral into a large, powerful combo, and if your combo is strong enough, making sure you can consistently draw a starter or an extender can be worth going down a card for. This is made even more important by how many generic search effects are heavily pointed, with Bonfire, Reinforcement of the Army, and Fire Formation Tenki all being 33 points or more. Decks are low on ways to simply add a key monster from your deck to your hand in Genesys. Especially with 7th Ascension being a searcher for Tachyon itself, we're likely to see quite a bit of these cards in the future of the Genesys format. And at number 5, we have Dark Ruler No More. This is a normal spell with the effect to negate the effects of all face-up monsters your opponent controls, but players cannot respond to this card with monster effects. Also, for the rest of the turn, your opponent takes no damage. Dark Ruler is a very useful board-breaking card that has, at times, even seen play in advanced format. It has lost some play to the newer and more versatile Forbidden Droplet, but that card costs 10 points, so you may not be able to squeeze it into your deck. Not to mention that the main downsides of Dark Ruler versus Droplet are that it's a normal spell, not a quick play, and it has a harsher form of damage prevention, and really, the gap in power level between the cards isn't that high. Dark Ruler is one of the most common cards players go to for a board breaker, something that helps you push through your opponent's imposing board of boss monsters. Often, these monsters will have tons of annoying effects, such as negates, protection, or removal stapled to them that will mess with your combo. And preemptively negating all of your opponent's monsters is a great way to make sure your game plan can actually succeed. While you won't be able to go for an OTK on the following turn, this can still change a game from being almost unwinnable to suddenly having a good chance of success. On the subject of powerful board breakers, there are a few unpointed cards that can serve this purpose that are worth bringing up. The Kaijus, as well as cards such as Lava Golem and the Winged Dragon in Raw Spear mode, allow you to tribute your opponent's monsters for cost to special summon them to your opponent's board. Though Golem and Sphere mode do eat up your normal summon to do this. These are some of the only ways to out-towers monsters, such as Experially Noir, that are unaffected by all other card effects, as attributing the monsters is technically a summoning condition and not an effect. These Tower Breakers and Dark Ruler can be overkill in certain decks. Often, a deck is just better trying to play more engine or general, more versatile interaction against a more mid-range style Yugioh deck. But these do give you a chance against decks that you otherwise couldn't. So a copy or two or some of these board breakers will most certainly find their way into main duelists' side decks. And at number 4, we have Runic Fountain. This is a field spell with the effects where you can activate Runic Quick Play spells from your hand during your opponent's turn. And also, once per turn, if you activate a Runic Quick Play spell, you can target up to 3 Runic Quick Play spells in your graveyard, put them on the bottom of your deck in any order, then draw that many cards. The Runic Quick Play spells all have 2 effects. One of them is to special summon a Runic Fusion from your extra deck to the Extra Monster Zone. But since the Extra Monster Zone doesn't exist in Genesys format, this effect can't be activated. This is really bad for the archetype, as their monsters are quite powerful, but luckily it doesn't completely ruin the deck. The rest of their effects are a variety of powerful control options, such as destroying a special summon monster, negating an effect monster, or destroying a spell or trap card. However, if you activate one of these effects, you do have to skip your next battle phase. Now that we're more acquainted with the Runic cards, we should mention that this spawnless list is less about Runic specifically, and more about generic spell and trap interaction in general, as all kinds of spell and trap removal has seen far more play in Genesys format than in the advanced format as late. Pointed options like Dark Hole, Book of Moon, and the Solemn Traps have proven themselves to be far more powerful in this format. Not only are there less negates floating around, but the lack of link monsters have made playing board breakers far more attractive. Flipping monsters face down with books is more viable, and IP Masquerena can't give destruction prevention to 90% of end board pieces anymore, making any and all board breakers a lot more powerful. In addition to this, lower power level decks have allowed normal traps to be a lot less punishing going second than they've traditionally been. They're not back to their former glory days where bottomless trap hole was a staple, but powerful enough normal traps that work with your deck are very reasonable to play in the format. Many decks can consider playing cards like Paleozoics or trap board wipes like Needle Sealing or Torrential Tribute. The only thing holding normal traps back is how harshly normal trap support has been hit in the format, as Trap Trick and Transaction Rollback and Trapaholic have all been pointed, though they are cheap enough that splashing a few points for them alongside powerful normal traps is quite an attractive prospect. Of all of these 0-point spell and trap options, the most high profile is the Runic engine, thanks to how well it interacts with the Radiant Typhoon engine. But it's clear that there's always been a shift towards this type of interaction across the entire format. And at number 3, we have Macrocosmos. This is a continuous trap with the effect where, when you flip it face up, you can special summon a Helios the Primordial Sun from your deck to the field. Also, while it's face up on the field, any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead. You could also include Dimensional Fissure in the slot, but Cosmos is largely more powerful thanks to being a continuous trap, and being able to surprise your opponent after activating a card like Foolish Burial, as well as hitting all cards and not just monsters. Genesys has been very aggressive towards floodgates in general. Even weak floodgates like Agent 07, which has never been played competitively, is still put at 100 points, just because it would be annoying to play against. For some reason, some of the only floodgates that didn't get this treatment were Macrocosmos and Fissure, despite the fact that these cards are still very powerful. There are a ton of decks that have a very difficult time playing with an active Macrocosmos. Obviously, decks like Shaddolls that are focused around the graveyard get hosed by the card pretty harshly, but even less graveyard-focused decks can be hurt by this effect. For an example, let's look at Punk. Its normal setup combo relies on using the effect of Noah Punk Deer Note's graveyard effect to special summon back a Punk that's not a level 5 from your graveyard, and many other decks have similar effects as part of their turn 1 combo. The only downside of Macrocosmos is that, more likely than not, your deck is going to be messed up by your own Macrocosmos. The only decks that can play something like this without messing up their own combos on later turns are ones that don't use the graveyard, which is almost none of them. You can just perform your combo and then force your opponent to play without the graveyard by flipping it during their turn, but there's a chance that backfires on you on your next turn. Still, that's a risk worth taking for a lot of decks. Macrocosmos is one of the reasons people are going to be side decking so many copies of Cosmic Cyclone in the format. And at number 2, we have Ultimate Slayer. This is a normal spell with the effect where you send one monster from your extra deck to the graveyard. Then you target one monster your opponent controls with the same type as that monster you sent, and shuffle it into your opponent's deck. Also, this card can't be responded to by your opponent's monster effects. This is, at present, probably the most splashable and useful 0-point board breaker in the format. It barely even has that high of a deck building cost. There are ways to make Ultimate Slayer far more powerful than even its text would imply. There are a number of cards that have effects when sent to the graveyard from the extra deck, such as Elder Entity Natis, which can target one card in the field and destroy it when it's sent to the graveyard. Now, Natis does cost 7 points, but there are cards with similar effects that are free for every single extra deck card type. For Fusion, you have Garura, Wings of Resonant Life, which draws a card when it goes to the grave. For Synchros, you have Golden Cloud Beast Malong, which allows you to target a card and return it to the hand. Finally, for XCs, you have Meteorological Aggregator, which can target a face-up card in the field and negate its effects until the end of the turn. By packing one copy of each of these cards in your extra deck, you not only answer any type of extra deck monster in the format, but you can do that while also drawing a card, or answering another card on your opponent's board. All of this on top of getting to answer an opponent's monster without them even being able to respond to it. Earlier, we mentioned that sometimes using cards like Kaijus or Dark Ruler No More can be slightly overkill. That's because they have a lot of extra downsides associated with using them. Slayer doesn't have any of the downsides of Dark Ruler, and doesn't give your opponent a monster like the Kaijus do. But Slayer not only answers what a Kaiju does, but does it while generating extra value at the same time, or with a lower cost than Dark Ruler. These slight efficiencies make Slayer ever so slightly better in many situations than the other 0-point board breakers. The only downside to Slayer is that it does have an ever so slightly higher deck building cost than other board breakers do. And all the way at number 1, we have DD Crow. This dark wing beast with 100 attack and defense has the effect where you can discard this card to target a card in your opponent's graveyard and banish it as a quick effect. Now, one of the biggest differences between Advance and Genesys format is how few hand traps there are. Staples such as Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, Infinite Impermanence, Drone Lockbird, and Nibiru all have pointed costs associated with them. You can't fit an entire playset to basically any hand trap in your deck if you're wanting to pay for a lot of powerful engine cards or generic extenders. Cards like Effect Veiler are a bit easier to fit into lists, but 0-point hand traps have become extremely important with this chance. The problem is that all of the 0-point hand traps are terrible. Don't let anyone trick you into putting no material into your deck. However, there is one exception to this rule, and that is, of course, DD Crow. This is the only good hand trap that isn't pointed on the list. As we mentioned with Macrocosmos, a ton of decks really need to use their graveyard for certain plays. While playing Macro can backfire on you, using Crow essentially never will. And sometimes it can be enough on its own to change the course of the game. If your opponent is really relying on a Monster Reborn effect in their deck to finish their combo, sniping the card they need to summon back with Crow can sometimes just be game over. The card is sometimes considered more powerful than Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion, which is at 5 points on the list, thanks to not having a hard once per turn and being slightly more versatile if sometimes less powerful, to the point that people will play either Crow or Ghost Bell in Advanced format to this day, depending on exactly what decks they're trying to beat. Crow is one of the only cards that really feels like they just forgot to put a point cost to. Even a tiny cost of 1 to 3 points would feel a lot more in line with the rest of the Genesys point list, as basically every other hand trap at least costs something to play. Crow is a card you absolutely will see in main and side decks in Genesys format, and is one of the most reliable 0-point options that almost every single deck in the format can play.